Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Strong Stoic podcast. I am your host. That's right, you know me by now, right? Brandon Tumlin. And before I introduce my very, very exciting guest, allow me to mention that this podcast is now part of the Walled Garden Podcast Network, which is basically just a bunch of podcasters who are interested in very similar things. If you haven't heard of it, the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, I'm sure you've heard of it by now. I've announced it several times, but it's basically, we're just a bunch of philosophers, man. We're seeking truth, seeking wisdom, virtue, and the divine, wherever it is to be found. I have been invited to be a founding member of that community as a director, contributor, mentor, and philosopher because I really believe in their mission. It's pretty much the same mission as the Strong Stoic podcast. So I also have a lot of love and respect for the people that are getting involved into that, many of which have already been a guest on this podcast. So if you'd like to find out more, please check out thewallgarden.com. Here you'll find more information about the mission vision of the not the mission vision, the mission and vision of the organization. I suppose mission vision works too, doesn't it? a lot of the people and a list of the people in the podcast involved, as well as a calendar of upcoming events, including a meetup that I will be doing on Fyodor Dostoevsky will be on there. Also, consider checking out my Patreon. Thanks to the supporters on there. Brandon Tumlin, you can check me out there. Consider joining my Telegram group chat, where we talk about all the ideas of the episodes, and also check out my blog posts on Medium and thestoicgym.com. Allow me to introduce my guest. Today, I have the absolute privilege of speaking with, for the second time, Todd Leader. Todd is a social worker and community psychologist. He's spent his over 20-year career leading service development and transformation, particularly in the areas of mental health, addiction, health promotion, and primary health care. This is his second time on the podcast, and in this episode, we talk specifically about leadership, how to be a good leader, the importance of humility and criticism, and much, much more. Really, really enjoyed talking to this guy. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Please welcome Todd Leader. Todd, listen, welcome. Thank you for joining me again. Glad to have you back. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so last conversation we had went really well, and I think I got a lot of good feedback. I know I told you personally, a lot of people resonated with what we spoke about, and one guy even said that he thought you were a natural Stoic, so I think that's a bit of a compliment there too.
Excellent.
So yeah, I guess, so today's topic, I guess, where we're going to head with this, and we'll see where it goes, of course, but we were speaking earlier about leadership. And I know you're a leader in your job, and myself as well. I'm a leader, so I have some thoughts on this. And so I don't really have a plan on where this is going to go, but I guess I'll open it up to you. What do you think, if you had to sum up what makes a good leader, just to get the conversation going? What would you say?
Well, if I were going to try to summarize it simply, I would say a good leader is someone who approaches work in a way that inspires people to want to follow. You know, I've often said anybody with a title can make somebody follow them, but a real leader makes people want to follow them. That's the distinction for me. Although, you know, we've got examples of people who don't do that. We've taken all kinds of other approaches. I mean, Hitler was an effective leader. But how did he do it? Well, he did it by pretty much forcing people to follow.
Right.
But he was effective at it. So would we call him a good leader? Well, I mean, I think we'd have to acknowledge that he had achieved some of his outcomes as a result, but I don't think in this day and age, in the way we think about leadership, I don't think we would call him a good leader. Because I think we've evolved in our understanding of that, so that we look more for that inspiration, for that desire to follow someone.
For sure.
We look for those kinds of intangible kinds of things as the sign of who a good leader is.
Yeah, they make you want to follow them. You know, I didn't report to this guy, but there was a leader in one of my old companies, and they said they would frequently say, actually, I'm the boss. And it kind of made me think, well, if you have to declare that you are the boss, You're probably not the boss. There's something, yeah, sure, you got the title, but if you have to use that on a regular basis, there's something wrong with your leadership style.
And it might be a bit pathetic.
Well, definitely, definitely.
But yeah, absolutely, for sure. I sort of witnessed over the years this bit of a trend that I've noticed, and that is that people, when they first, I guess, sort of graduate from what you think of as frontline work into anything management, like any kind of quasi leadership role, supervisor, manager, anything like that. They think of that as being sort of leadership related, but often, if it's early in their career, especially, they start to think that means they're the boss, and that their job is to be the boss. There's this sort of early naive perception that being in management, stepping into that, means now you have to become the boss. Mm-hmm. And that terminology, that conceptualization of it, is problematic. And so you often, I have often seen, I should say, people who have taken on that kind of persona, even though it's not really who they are normally or who they used to be.
Yeah.
But they think that's the role, and they're really just misjudging that. And it might be based on their past experiences. It might be based on, I don't know, just this sort of almost mythology about what it means to be responsible for a group of people in a workplace. But the job certainly is not about being the boss.
Right.
And I've seen people learn that over years.
Yeah.
They kind of gradually learn. Most people. I know of some people who never learned it.
Yeah.
And they still function as if they're the boss.
As if they're the boss, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk, we'll go down a little rabbit hole here, but you do have to change your approach a little bit when you take that jump from, say, just a member of the team to the leader of the team. There's a different disposition that you have to have. There's a different philosophy and mentality you have to adopt. And, because you'll hear some people say, well, you changed when you became the leader. And it's almost like, well, yeah, you have to change a little bit. Now, you don't have to go the way you said, where I'm the boss, that kind of mentality. But there does need to be, what I would maybe say that there's a higher expectation for yourself and your role, as opposed to, what would you say, as opposed to being served, you have to serve. Mm-hmm. And that's the key point, and really the mindset that has to change. But I think there's a level of professionalism maybe that you have to grow into and adopt when you take on that role. So like, what would you say are some of the things that you need to change or you should change, making that transition into a leadership role?
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree completely. There's absolutely a need to change your overall approach, your kind of persona. But I guess the things that come to mind as the most important are, you need to up your game in listening. I would put that as number one. Because, if I'm working a kind of a frontline position where I'm not responsible for people and for leading or managing, I just have to listen enough to know what my job is and do my job. But once you have responsibility for other people or for the outcome of a team of people's work, then you have to be able to listen constantly and intently. There's got to be true intention to understand what people are saying. And lots of leadership gurus have talked about that. Listening to understand instead of just hearing, kind of. But I think that's the most important one, actually. And you also have to adopt a perspective that is more about the big picture. That's more about the complete operation of the organization or the team, and really be kind of collectively outcome oriented. Which really means also, my leadership work has been in the public sector and government and healthcare and nonprofits, and so that perspective, that big picture view, has to include things like politics, and how is that going to affect, how are elections going to affect our ability to do this work? And it has to involve, budgets and how to kind of control that, recognizing that it's taxpayer money.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our money. It's not our corporate money.
Yep.
Nobody owns it. It's the taxpayers, which creates an ethical obligation in me to manage it right. And I mean that from an ethics perspective when I say right.
Right.
There is that obligation that comes with it. And so it's about kind of seeing all of that stuff and then listening deeply to people.
I think that's probably personally one of the biggest things I realize is how much you have to listen to people. It's like you think a lot of people think that when you become a leader that you talk, you direct, and that's what you do. But the best leaders that I've seen are the ones who actually listen way more than they talk. And it's normally, what I tend to see is they're listening, and the reason they're listening, they're doing it to make the other person feel valued and all that, but they're really listening because they want to have the appropriate information to make the best decision possible. And so it's really input, it's information, because as the leader, you're not going to be into all the details. So you need to have people that are into those details, but that can communicate that up to you so that you have the right perspective. And so it's something like listening is your mechanism for observing all of those details and noting all those details so that you can make a sound decision.
Yeah. But without necessarily being involved enough to know all of the details, but
Correct.
To hear the summary of it, to hear someone's packaging of that information into advice.
Yes.
And because otherwise you become the cliche micromanager.
Yeah.
If you need to know all the details in order to make the decision, it means that you don't trust people.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I tend to be a trusting person, and I think probably some would say to a fault. My wife would certainly say that for sure. But I believe that in leadership role, trust is a two-way essential feature. And I believe a leader needs to be prepared to trust his people or her people or their people, unless there's evidence to say they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Until or unless there is a reason to say, okay, I've got to start to now wonder. And sometimes that happens. You'll see, you'll be trusting, but then you'll kind of hear of something happening that's just not right. Well, okay, so put the trust in your pocket, and now you look for what's really happening.
Yeah.
But unless there is something like that, I think it's important to show people that you trust them, because I think trust becomes a reciprocal experience.
Yes. I think a huge part too is that part of that trust relationship is knowing where the person is in terms of their level of competence, right? Because if you have someone, and I've experienced this when I was a young employee, you come in and you probably don't have a whole lot of confidence because you're pretty new, but there's some things and so if you have a new boss and they come in and they start teaching you stuff that you already know, your ego goes, well, I already know that, right? You almost get a little bit standoffish. But when I was a kid, maybe I felt like that. But now I look back and I say, well, no, because they need some mechanism to know where you are and what your level of competence is. And so part of that is through, observation, and you need to judge that over time. But yeah, it's weird, right? Because you can't, like in a job, there's so many details that there's no way you can really know where someone is. And especially with young people, what you end up having is they're knowledgeable somewhat in some areas, and then other areas that are maybe just as basic, they have no idea. Mm-hmm. And it's just they've been exposed to a certain thing and they haven't been in the workplace enough to adopt that other skill. What do you think goes into that, like knowing where your employees actually are? And we're trying to maybe not trigger their ego, but also making sure they don't fail at their job.
Yeah, well, I think if the right, type or level of supervision is in place, which provides them with lots of opportunity to feel supported in growing and learning and developing. And, if you create a safe kind of environment in a workplace where people don't have to worry about coming and saying, I don't know how to do this. Is there a way you can help me? I'm struggling with this. I'm going to be late with this report, and here's why. Or if you create an environment where they don't feel they have to worry about being imperfect, then I think much of that looks after itself, because people want to be able to be successful in doing their job. And I'm not saying everybody wants to be, not everybody is ambitious in terms of wanting to climb or, those, but people want to be able to know that when they leave their job at the end of a day or a night, that they've done the job well, and that their employment isn't at risk. And, and so I think if you create an environment that allows for imperfection to be acknowledged and then supported in correction, and then I think people will do that. I tend to believe that people will simply kind of supervise themselves, and they'll also be comfortable hearing feedback. They'll also be comfortable hearing critique of what they're doing if it comes in the form of coaching.
Right.
We were talking earlier about strength training and stuff, and you've done some coaching in that in the past. Well, so what is coaching? It's not criticizing, but it absolutely is pointing out how something can be better.
Absolutely.
But in what tone?
Yeah.
With what kind of words? With what kind of approach in the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Coaching is very much a process of holding somebody up.
Yeah.
Of supporting. And so I think that's a critical feature of leadership and of management. And I see those as different but overlapping processes.
I love that you connected it to coaching, because the first thing you do when you have a new athlete come in is you find out where they are. That's the very first thing, because if they can squat 200 pounds and you assign them 300 pounds, you're just completely stupid. And so part of like what feeds into that for workplace are things like experience level. So like, if someone has 5 years experience, you roughly know where they are, but obviously there's a lot of individual variation in that, but you have some idea. And then I think the other one, like you said, it's through creating that environment where you can actually go and people are going to be embarrassed about it a lot of the times, especially initially, right? Like, especially if it's something like if you're in a team meeting and the boss says something and everyone nods their head and knows what he's talking about, and you're sitting here, what the hell did he just say? And then you have to kind of put your tail between your legs and crawl to him after the meeting and ask him what he meant. Like that's really hard on the ego, especially when you're young and trying to, succeed and get your name out there and everything. But yeah, I think that is very crucial, and it comes through maybe initially saying, like, listen, if you don't understand something, come to me. Yeah. But then the most important part, I think, is after that, when they come to you, that you don't make them feel stupid, which can be difficult because it depends on how simple the question is and what your expectations are, right? So, yeah.
But yeah, that's I think that's crucial, because that still is about safety, right? Safety. The idea of feeling embarrassed asking a question. Ideally, you should have a culture that doesn't allow that embarrassment.
Right.
Because it's really no big deal. And so, so somebody comes to you and asks you a question that you think of as pretty fundamental, that maybe you think that most people should have known that by the time they finished whatever education or experience they have. If your response is, I'm surprised you're asking that, but no problem, I'll help you. Well, that's going to increase the embarrassment, and they're not going to come ask you next time.
Yeah.
Even though that was really not a harsh response.
Right.
It still was a response that said, you're strange.
Yeah.
Or incomplete.
Something wrong.
Or inadequate.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of just, no problem, have a seat.
Yeah.
That's it, and let's talk about it. So here's what I meant, here's why I said it that way. Does that make sense?
Right.
That's not didn't you cover that in your
Yeah.
coursework before? Just
Yeah.
nothing. It's just unconditional support.
Yeah.
That's it, with no frills, with no edge, with no attitude, with nothing, not reflecting anything of what my expectations were or are. It's irrelevant. Person asks a question, just answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. When you do that, then you get people who they simply don't hesitate to come and say, I've got a problem, or I've got a gap in my knowledge or my experience or something.
Yeah.
They don't hesitate because it's safe.
Right.
Psychologically and otherwise, it's safe to just do it because nobody is ever going to judge.
Yeah.
Because they only want you to do better. That kind of requires, going back to some of our previous conversation, it kind of requires that we, in our management and leadership kind of work, requires that we're able to, to put aside any of our own ideals or preferences or expectations and just do what's best for someone else. There's a selflessness needed in that conversation, where, well, it doesn't matter what I think somebody should have known by now, or whether I think this is basic information, or you should know how to do this. That's not really relevant. What's relevant is this person wants support right now, and so put aside all of my issues and just do what's best for the other person.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate on this a little bit, because, and I know we were predominantly talking about, younger people coming into the field and everything, but one of the things that I would say has bothered me in my job is sometimes you meet someone, or you have to work with someone who is like, they're the senior in the room kind of thing. Like, by all accounts, they should know. I'm not talking like 5 years older. I'm talking like they're at the end of their career. They got 5 years left. And part of this gets back to, we spoke last time about a basic level of competence for something like a therapist job, where, you have to do the job as it's supposed to be done. And so, it's harsh. This is the problem with what I'm going to say here. It is a little harsh, but when you're like mid-20s, even like 30s, like, it's okay to kind of be like a beginner and not really know what you're doing. But if you've been in that job for 30 years and you still don't know what you're doing, that's no longer really okay. Especially what tends to happen in some companies is they promote the people that have been there the longest, which is obviously not necessarily a good recipe. But personally, I would say that this idea scares me into working harder and making sure I know what I'm doing, because I fear being the 60-year-old that's sitting at the table and I still don't know what I'm talking about. Right? I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think that there are a couple pieces to that. I think one is that times change and expectations change, and so in your field, technology changes, and approaches to things, and and certainly in all the social science kind of side of things, same thing. We evolve in our knowledge. And not everybody who's already working in the field keeps up with that. They don't keep the pace.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what happens sometimes. And so if you don't have an organizational culture set by the leaders that really promotes and supports people keeping up with the times, then you're going to see that happen. And Brandon's going to be that 60-year-old who really doesn't know shit. And, because the new stuff, you would never have taken the time to attend some training or read some new articles or whatever. So I think that's one key piece of it. But it's not good enough for a leader to simply say, you're expected to keep up. I think that's fine to an extent, but it is an organization's job to help the staff keep up with changing times, with new approaches. So making available those opportunities and paying people to attend, and those types of things I think are an essential piece of that. And I think that I've also seen people who just get kind of stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
This is the way I've done it, and they really don't have any interest in changing. And I think that's where I guess the management piece of things comes in. And, I think people do need to be called out on that. But in a way that is supporting their evolution, not in a way that is tearing down what they believe to be the way to do things.
Right. Well, that is the function of younger employees. Like, I feel like sometimes we think about younger employees as these useless employees that we need to train and get them to a certain level of competence. But my experience with it is a lot of the younger employees, it's the same thing with the generational issues, the generational idea, right? That the new generation has adapted to the current environment, which has changed from the time that you were born. So we're always growing as a society. So what ends up happening is, eventually things speed on past you, especially now, right? Because technology is just booming out of control. The new generation come in, they understand, for example, how social media works. They have an understanding of technology that even myself, my brother is quite a bit younger than me. He's a teenager, and even him, he has a relationship and an understanding with technology that even I can't grasp.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm already starting to see that. And it's, so they actually absolutely serve a function. And on the other side, like what, to your point, is the experienced people, obviously they bring something to the table as well. That's experience of the industry. But there needs to be cross-pollination there to some extent. Yeah. And somewhere you end up meeting in the middle, but there needs to be understanding of the modern work environment and the technologies that come with that, while also understanding the fundamentals that made of the work itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it's one that many of us need to continue to remind ourselves of, those of us who manage workforces. And I think the way you've described it is dead on with the way a good leader should be approaching it. Because, leadership is about a team. It's about a group of people. It's not typically about one. Right? It's about a collection, a collective. And so how do you get the best out of a group of people? Well, you capitalize on the diversity of what they bring. But that means first recognizing it, which is what you're just talking about, right? And I think we do have, I don't know, there's a bit of a stereotype there of the younger generation. I don't know if it's X or Z or Q. I don't know what it is. I can't keep track these days, but but we do have this stereotype. There are a number of them probably that are negative about this younger generation, when in fact they are bringing just a different approach. It's not necessarily better or worse. It's probably a combination of both, the same as the older generation brings a combination of both. Yeah. I bring some good stuff and some bad stuff to my workplaces because of my age, because of my generation. So I think it's about recognizing and valuing just simply the diversity of cultures. And, I use that term quite broadly, right? Because from one generation to another, we are talking about culture differences.
Right.
And recognizing that, and then trying to pull all the best out of everybody into that collective direction, that collective approach and product or outcome. That's leadership.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say that what you're talking about there in terms of the younger generational issues, I find myself in the middle of this because the generation that's older than me, they were of the type, especially in my industry, they were of the type that you get what you want. Not that you work for what you want kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's no company that's going to come in and give you what you want. If you want something, you have to work for it and you have to take it. And then the younger generation, they have higher expectations in terms of what they require from a company. So they require things like better leadership. They have really high expectations for that. And so I'm kind of caught in the middle. So I understand both sides to some degree, and I have a lot of respect for, I think about like my ancestors that came here and they were fishermen, and then they went down, they built their house on the islands, and then they started fishing, and then they made their way. There was no like company coming in and providing benefits or anything like that. And I have a huge respect for that. At the same time, there does have to be some level of expectation from companies, because if you want people to work there, if you want to make a good team, there are certain requirements now that people come to expect. And so I'm catching myself in the middle of this, right? But it's I have respect for both approaches. I really do, and I do think there's value in that, and it makes me excited to see what's going to come after the youngest generation. What's next, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right. I mean, the younger generation does have higher expectations, and I think that's become a challenge for people in leadership, because many of the people in leadership roles are, in the 40s, 50s, 60s kind of age range, right? And so because there does tend to be a general correlation with age, right? Because people climb their way into those in terms of experience. And so, yeah, that culture difference, though, between the generations makes it a bit of a challenge when you have people coming in with expectations that seem, I don't know, extraordinarily high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to somebody who might have a sort of an older or more traditional kind of approach, as you say, to kind of working for it, earn it. You don't get that right up front. You got to prove yourself, and but it's complicated by some things we were talking about earlier. It's complicated by the fact that our younger generations also are quicker to just say, heck with this, I'm out of here. And just jump to another job and jump to another organization, and that makes it a challenge for people running companies and organizations now, because you end up with much more staff turnover if you can't meet everybody's expectations.
Right.
And that's a problem, because it's in many cases simply not possible to meet everybody's expectations when they come in so high right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of our future challenges, current and evolving challenges, I think, generally in leadership, is how do you do that? How do you recruit and retain people and meet their expectations, even if they're kind of unrealistic, because sometimes they are.
Yeah.
It doesn't make those people wrong for wanting or expecting, but it does make them not really very practical.
Well, it begs the question then, what has to happen for them to realize, the employee, meaning what has to happen for them to realize that their expectations are maybe a little bit too high? And I know we spoke earlier about relationships and how that ties in. It's a similar thing where you have all these expectations. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things we need to have an appreciation for is just how complicated and messy life is, period. Workplace relationships, but everything in that. If you're going to run away at the first imperfection, you're never going to do anything ever, because life is full of, not on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, there's imperfections that come up. And so, I guess what has to happen for people to realize that, okay, this company might not be perfect, but doesn't mean it's a bad company. It just means it's not perfect, just like everything else in life.
Yeah. I've been in lots of jobs, and I've been in lots of leadership roles, and I've not found perfection yet.
Let me know if you do.
In any organization, any program, I think perfection doesn't exist as a concept. It doesn't exist. I think it's aspirational only, and otherwise doesn't exist. And so if people are looking for that, they are going to be constantly disappointed and constantly jumping from job to job or from relationship to relationship, because nothing is ever going to meet what they think is that standard. And I think media and social media, of course, I think they've contributed to that, to this picture we paint in our minds. Look at the love stories and the romantic comedies and stuff. Watch every Matthew McConaughey movie that was ever made, and you'll see this idealism about what love is, and love at first sight, and what good relationship is. And okay, sorry, that shit's not real.
Yeah.
That's just not. And the same with jobs, the same with careers. We see all kinds of, in the media and the social media, we only see all this positive and excitement and passion and really kind of perfection. And it doesn't exist. What does exist, I think, is the idea of two things or two people fitting together, being a match.
Harmony.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that exists. So there's no such thing as a good job or a bad job, a good organization or a bad organization, a good employee or a bad employee. I don't think those dichotomies are real. But there is absolutely such a thing, and there's evidence to back this up, as a good match between a person, like an employee, and a job.
Yeah.
I mean, I can hire one person today for a particular job, and that person could walk away saying, "Oh my God, this job sucks. I hate it. It's a terrible job. Don't apply for that." And the next person I hire could stay with it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And love every second of it. It is about fit. And I think relationships are the same. And, I think, if we go into these things thinking that somehow everything is supposed to fit all of my needs and be nice and smooth all the time, and well, you're going to live a disappointing life, because that's not what life is. It's not what work is. It's not what relationships are. And I think when you set the bar like that, so there's a need, I think, there's a need for our culture overall, I guess, but certainly our younger generations to recognize that there is no perfect, and there really is this. You should be looking for a good fit.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been together so relationships, again, same thing. We've been together for almost 34 years. And as I told you earlier, I just got his t-shirts that said, annoying each other for 34 years and still going strong.
Love it.
And when I showed it to my wife, she laughed her head off, because that's exactly it. So there will always be things about partners, people we're dating or connected to in a more formal way, and employment situations and bosses, and there'll always be things that will just annoy you, mm-hmm. or make you angry or sad, or all of those things. And that's life.
That's life, yeah.
It is. Just, as long as it's not someone or a job or whatever that you hate, or that's causing you to be ill, mentally ill or something in some way, that's a different, that's time to run. But otherwise, there's a need to sort of just relax more and get rid of the idealism that's on Instagram posts and rom-coms and movies, and
Yeah, I've come to think about those, because those things always bother you, right? That's one of the life's hardest things, is dealing with those imperfections. But I've come to try and conceptualize it as an opposing force that is steadying. So it's almost like, if you're cutting a piece of board, the board just wiggles out of control, it vibrates, and you can't get a good cut. But if the other person comes along and holds the board down, now that's an opposing force, but what it's doing is it's allowing you to do your job better. And I almost feel like it's like that. It's like that with relationships, but it's also like that with work. And so maybe we can segue into this. When you're a leader, you actually want that pushback and that critique. And what that is that's an opposing force. And the only thing it's bad for is your ego, right?
Yeah.
The only thing it's bad for is your ego, because you have this idea of how things are, and then someone comes in and offers a criticism of that. And you, because of your ego, don't want to look at that. But the benefit of that is that maybe they're telling you about a hole that you're just about to walk into. And so, yeah, it's opposing, but it's also steadying. It's putting you on a path that's addressing your individual weaknesses. And so I know we spoke a bit about this before, but we'll have to talk about it again in terms of taking critique from your team. Let's say you're in a team meeting and you have this plan, and creating that environment. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm a really big believer in disagreement, in the value of disagreement and debate, and even if it's passionate and heated, I'm a big believer in it. In any aspect of life, quite frankly, my wife and I have had absolutely terrible fights. But we've had a million disagreements, and it's a normal part of life. It's probably a daily thing, because we're different people. So of course we're going to disagree on things, whether it's what are we going to have to eat for dinner, or what time should we leave for something. So in my work, certainly I have continued. This has just been my own particular passion. I've continued to say to teams that I'm responsible for leading, I expect disagreement from you. It's not that I respect disagreement. You'll hear all kinds of softer versions of this a lot, or you might go to a workshop and somebody will have the flip chart out and they say, okay, we need some group rules before we start, and so we'll respect differences of opinion. And I think, okay, what is that even saying? Yeah. What does that mean? We'll respect differences of opinion. It's too soft.
Right.
The reality is, if you want the best results from a team, from an organization, the true best results, you need the diversity of perspectives and information and insights and questions. You need that. Yeah. Diversity is the solution. I mean, if you look at companies like Apple and Google and some of these huge monsters that have literally been creative monoliths, how did they get there? Well, they got there by encouraging people to just have no rules in how they think and debate.
Yeah.
Well, because it facilitates creativity. But more importantly, the reason I do it with teams, the reason I say to people I expect disagreement, is because it's not possible for them to sit in a discussion with me for an hour and agree with everything I think. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
There's someone not telling the truth.
Right.
There's someone withholding a thought, and I want the best of everybody. And somebody I used to work with used to refer to people in committee meetings that never disagreed, that never really said anything of substance other than just agreeing with people. She referred to them as noodle necks. Or bobbleheads, we would say now,
nodding all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I could hire monkeys to sit around a table and just
nod.
Not disagree. So why do we hire people? We hire them for what they can contribute.
Right.
It's really that simple. So if I'm not getting disagreement from people, then there's something not right.
Yeah.
And so I promote it as something that's an expectation in their job.
Yeah.
That if you have if you get information that's going to tell me how I should make a decision better, or a direction that I should be helping us go in that's going to be more effective, if you don't tell me, well, I think that's really kind of negligent.
It is.
And so I want people to know that so I expect, and I don't care if you're angry about a decision I made and you feel like you need to yell at me about it by telling me how to change it, or I don't care how you tell me, just tell me.
Just get it out.
Just say, Todd, I think you're being a jerk and that's wrong. And the way you're doing this is wrong. And I don't agree with it, so you got to stop it now.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay, so should I get, I don't know, offended or angry because, I'm the boss? No. Yeah. I should be listening because somebody's passionate about something. Therefore, there's something important here.
Yeah.
And so that passion that might come across as anger or whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is they're sharing it.
Right.
And my number one job is to listen and synthesize all of this information and these passionate opinions together.
Well, if they are right, you need to know that information. So, like, again, if they're telling you that there's a big hole in the backyard, you want to know because you don't want to walk down that hole.
Yeah.
But even if they're wrong, let's say worst case scenario, they're completely wrong in their criticism. Well, it gives you an opportunity to, first of all, explain your reasoning, but also maybe we do things all the time that we don't know why we do it. It might be just out of habit. So if someone questions something, even though maybe it's still the right decision, it's going to challenge you to reconsider the reasoning behind that. And I would always, and even still, when I take on new athletes, I always tell them I'll make them a plan for the training, and I say, okay, here's what you do this day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on. Now, anything on this, you should be able to point your finger, and you should ask me why it's there. And if I can't tell you, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the way it has to be. It's like, now that's a huge responsibility for me, because now that puts the responsibility on me to make sure that I'm really thinking this stuff through. But I actually love that. And I always tell people this. This is the plan. If you pick something, anything, and you add, I should have a reason for that. And if I don't, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And I encourage that because I want to know. And again, sometimes you just throw in stuff like, you'll throw in, I don't know, front squats and say, well, why am I doing that? I think, oh, actually, you're right. You don't need to do those because you're not a weightlifter, whatever it is. And then you get rid of it. And it's the same thing with a plan. Why are we doing it like this? Well, yeah, actually, that's kind of a carryover from the way we used to do things, and it doesn't make any sense anymore because we have this, so let's get rid of that. And that process, whether they're right or wrong, that information is still valuable to you as a leader, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a conversation very recently, actually, with my own sort of leadership team, and it was a personnel issue. It was, in some ways it's simple, in some ways it's really complex, but I kind of made a statement fairly early on in the discussion that about what I thought was the best decision. Like, I think we should just, whatever. And one of the people that reported to me sternly said to me, no, I think that's wrong. It's not the way we should be going, and here's why. And so I sat and I listened, and my response was, all right, you win. You're right. I think this is where my reaction was coming from. It kind of did force me to go back and ask myself, why did I just say that? Why did I jump to that conclusion, to that end point in terms of a decision? It was about dismissing somebody, but why did I jump to that? And so this sort of forced me to back up a step and ask that question, and then to incorporate the new perspective, new information. And so the result was, okay, I was wrong, you're right, well, let's do it your way.
Yeah, and as a leader, you want the best plan. You don't want your plan. You want the best plan because you want to succeed. And we spoke earlier about how at the end of the day, your name is on that. Yeah. Now, I think what a good leader does is when there's a success, you say the team was successful. It's all on the team. And when there's a failure, you say, I failed.
Absolutely.
Now that is one of the most difficult things to do because you're never taking credit for anything except for failure. Yeah. And that the amount of, let's say, humility and the amount of even like mental fortitude it takes to have that kind of mentality is very, very, very difficult. But I think it's essential because if everyone knows that if you're on a team and the boss takes all the credit, that's not a very good boss. Likewise, if there's a failure and the boss starts pointing out individual employees, that's not good either.
That's politics, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty much politics. That's exactly it. That I think when you accept a leadership position, you accept that very premise that you need to be willing to openly say everything that goes wrong is my fault and everything that goes right is the team's success.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and takes us back to previous conversations about selflessness, about a need, and whenever I use that term and talking about these kinds of things, I always feel a little bit uncomfortable because it feels like I'm saying, I'm some kind of martyr or anybody
Right.
that believes this stuff is trying to be something perfect, and it's really quite the opposite. It's not that. It's about having a genuine sense of humility, first of all, being humble enough to know that you have that if things do go wrong, if somebody makes a mistake who reports to you, that it is ultimately your responsibility. And it is somewhere along the way probably a mistake that you've made or something you could have foreseen, or there is a need to genuinely recognize that you're probably right accepting that responsibility. If you were to trace things back and say, well, could I have prevented that?
Yeah.
That mistake that Joe made over here? Well, sometimes probably, yeah. So, but that takes that level of humility, and then it also takes that level of selflessness that I believe is essential for good leadership. That it's just not about you. It's about the results. It's about the team succeeding in whatever, in building the company or in having an impact on society or somebody's life that they serve.
Yeah.
It's about that. And so how do you put aside your own ego, your own need for pats on the back, and just give people the credit and the pats on the back when things go well, and let them know that no matter what they do, unless it has malicious intent,
Yeah.
no matter what they do, any mistakes they make, I've got you.
Yeah.
That's my job. Just so don't worry about it.
Right.
And so that's the kind of conversation I have with my team members all the time. They'll come in and say, I got to tell you something that happened. Here's what I said. Here's what my email said. Here's the reaction it got. Here's whatever. And so I just say, well, thanks for telling me. And so, let's talk about how to resolve it now. But if it goes sour, I've got you.
Yeah.
That's it. It's my responsibility, not yours.
Yeah.
It splashes on me, not you.
For sure.
It's just, I don't know. It just has to be that way.
It has to be that way.
Sadly, that's not what gets modeled for us, right? If you look at elected officials, for instance, in pretty much around the world, but certainly here in Canada, we see it all the time. Where elected officials, something goes wrong, and so they want a scapegoat. They will often look for somebody to terminate, or to take the fall for them intentionally, just to support the party. We see that kind of stuff, and it's modeling the opposite of leadership. Mm-hmm. It's modeling selfishness, and it's unfortunate. Yeah, because it gives people the wrong impression of what leadership is.
Yeah, and what maybe where we can go next with this is that ultimately I think the leader is somewhat of I don't want to say idol, but they set the standard for how to act. So if something goes wrong in the team, the leader, let's say a new team that's coming together, the leader has to be the first one to set the standard for, I will take responsibility for the failures. And if I fail as a leader, I will take responsibility for that and let everyone know what's going to come after that in terms of what can we do to fix it, make sure it doesn't happen again. So what I see is when you have a leader like that, what ends up happening is not what everyone thinks is going to happen. They think, oh, then everyone's going to start blaming me for everything. That's not what happens. When you start saying, I screwed up here, the employees start going, no, well, there's something I didn't do that I probably should have done. And so you end up creating that culture, and that's what you want. You want that buy-in, not that everyone's feeling guilty all the time, but that everyone recognizes, especially as a leader that has to set the standard, that you all have a part to play in this. I mean, I could say, Todd, you didn't tell me this information, or I could say, well, Brandon, you didn't ask Todd for the information. And both are true.
Yes.
But my responsibility as an individual is to blame myself first. And what can I do to empower myself to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The word I is really a fascinating one, right? Because it can be our downfall if we center too much of life around it. But in that kind of case, I think it's the opposite. I think that it is the solution to this issue. It is at the center of good leadership is that willingness to say, to ask the question, what could I have done differently? Instead of what could you have done differently to prevent this?
Correct.
I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't end up with both happening in the conversation, but you're right. I think leaders have a responsibility to model that that level of self. What a friend of mine, former colleague, refers to as self-critical reflection.
Yeah.
And you've got to model that and that's about taking responsibility. It's about truly reflecting on kind of what could you have done differently, and then accepting responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And the more you model that, the more you will see that happen. You will see employees come forward. I spent 17 years in the healthcare system in leadership roles, and in healthcare there's this kind of interesting concept that's about reporting mistakes, really. So mistakes in surgery, or infections that shouldn't have happened, or somebody that's been in a bed for a very long time and develops bed sores, basically ulcers on their skin, and like all kinds of things happen, and you see that, and you see it in the movies, and but mistakes are made. That mistakes happen, and you can create two different kinds of cultures around that issue. One is a culture that is about trying to tighten things up so tight that we're just not going to make mistakes anymore. Okay, so what does that do? If you're an employee who just did make a mistake, God forbid you be an imperfect human, because the rest of us are not. But if you make a mistake, what are you going to do? Are you going to feel safe coming forward in a culture that is all about, we will not make mistakes, we're going to tighten things up? Of course you're not going to come forward. And so then there's no ability to resolve it. There's no ability to correct it, and no ability, more importantly, to learn from it to prevent it in future. Right. Whereas if you create a blame-free culture where we really just want you to say, when we make a mistake, we want you to report it. We want you to put it on paper, because we want to be able to look at it and say, okay, so what are the things that contributed to that?
Yeah.
All right, so bet if we made a change just in that one process over here, or if we added that one more line to that form that we use, then that probably will prevent these things in future.
Yeah.
And so when you create that kind of culture and say, it's like, you're not in trouble if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
You're not in trouble. You just made a mistake.
Right.
When we do that, which means, though, the leader really has to be ready to accept responsibility for those mistakes.
Yes.
Because somebody has to be. The world just creates that approach where somebody has to be responsible for mistakes.
And that is the leader,
right? And
by definition.
And if you say to your team, your people, I've got you, and a mistake is just a mistake. So come, let's work it out. Let's try and prevent it in future, and we're good. Mm-hmm. Then that means that I wear it. So then if there's there's a public outcry or a lawsuit or whatever, then it's my thing. This person just made a mistake, and that's all.
Yeah. Now so we spoke quite a bit about a lot of this being open to criticism and being welcoming. I'd like to go the other route just a little bit and play the other extreme, because I do think that there are things that you should not tolerate as a leader. You mentioned malicious intent, and I would agree with that. I would say somewhat in the same ballpark is, I've dealt with people who couldn't criticize me to my face, and we would have, and it's not that, we would actually have a conversation, and they just couldn't tell me their criticism, and then they would go either above me or horizontally to someone else and then tell them about the criticism. And I would always say to those people, I would say, listen, I really don't care what you say to me. I don't care what you call me, but you have to come to me and tell me because I need to know this, right? I need to know this for myself because I want to grow. But it also doesn't look good. Like when you have employees starting to, go behind people's back and all that stuff, and it doesn't look good as a team. But it's also not good for you as a leader, as someone who's looking to grow. So I always tell people, like, I don't, kind of the same with you. You can call me an asshole. And I've dealt with that because I deal with sailors quite a bit, right? And they can get pretty vocal sometimes in how they feel. But I really don't mind it. What I mind is when you tell me to my face, oh yeah, no, everything's okay. And then you go and criticize to the people that you shouldn't be criticizing to. So I don't know what. That's just one of the things that I found to be intolerable as a leader. So I'm not going to accept that type of behavior. I'll open it to you. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think the question is about how do you deal with it and how do you prevent it? So, because that kind of thing creates toxicity in a workplace, right? Because that is what feeds gossip.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, what is gossip? Well, it's really talking about a person who's not there. That's the simplest way I've ever been able to come up with kind of conceptualizing it. So that's what I say to my staff. If you find yourself in a conversation about somebody who's not there,
that's gossip.
Then that's gossip.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's simply reporting facts. Like, I know that so-and-so on the last shift, did this, this, and this. So that part's done. So you just need to do this part on your shift. That's different.
Yeah.
But, so that all that gossip and toxicity, it can destroy a company, it can destroy an organization, it can absolutely destroy in the fields that I'm in. It can destroy the care that's provided to people.
Yeah, and that's the worst.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge ethics issue, and it's a workplace health and safety issue. And I think that I've said the same thing to staff. I don't care how you tell me. Just tell me. If you think I'm an asshole and I'm being whatever, then tell me. And I had an employee once who actually sort of tested that because she was so mad. She said, "Oh, if I had a 2x4 right now, I swear I'd whack you with it."
Incitement to violence. I like
it. But I quite respected that, and I know that's extreme, and many people listening would be, but. But we had a good relationship, and it wasn't like I knew the way she meant that. She wasn't actually going to come in with a 2x4, So out of context, that one might sound pretty bad, but But the point is, that's the point. I don't care about what your concern is with me. And one of the things that I tell people is I don't take that stuff personally.
Yeah.
If it's related to me doing a better job, I don't take it personally. It isn't. It's only personal to the extent that it gives me the opportunity to grow. That's the only way that it's personal.
Yeah.
And so so tell me. But one of the things that I have found, and this is just my own personal style, I guess, more than anything, and it gets tiring, I'm sure, for people. But I tend to also use, kind of intentionally, it's become instinct now, but I use self-deprecating humor.
Yeah, I love that.
Regularly.
Yeah.
So that people can see that I don't think I'm all that.
Right, yeah.
I refer to myself as a short, fat, old, bald guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I do that kind of stuff, or I'll make jokes about my own memory, or we'll joke about, I don't know, it's been a busy few weeks, lots of balls getting dropped, that kind of thing, and so now people will look to me and say, yeah, I know,
Yeah, right.
Like everyone knows I'm completely comfortable being insulted.
Yeah.
And being the brunt of the jokes and all of that, and that's kind of how I've always been. I like to make jokes to begin with. I like to keep things light, But if I can make myself the brunt of it, it helps create. It helps to sort of say in concrete terms, I'm not going to take stuff personally, and so it demonstrates it as opposed to just saying it.
Yeah.
Right.
What that does too, which is really, really important, is it shows people that idolize you. And a lot of people do, especially younger people. They come in, if you're a good leader, they idolize you a little bit. What it does is it shows them that, it's okay to mess up, and one of those things. I mean, Nietzsche said something like, "He who cannot find his way to his ideal acts worsely than he who has no ideal. I know that's wordy, but basically what it means is that if I'm coming into a company and I see this leader and he's like the perfect leader in my mind, but I can't see how I could ever become this perfect leader, well, I'm not going to give a shit anymore. And I'm going to act worse than someone who doesn't even care about the leader.
Interesting.
So it's a very interesting idea. So one of the things that doing that does is, okay, well, if you come in as a leader and you say, oh yeah, when my first few years in the job, I had this horrible mistake and just like lost the company a bunch of money or whatever it was, then the person, when they're young and they're looking up to you and they say, oh, well, I made a mistake last week. So I guess you can make mistakes and also become a good leader over time.
Yeah. I've been teaching university psychology for 33 years or so, and one of the things that I share sometimes with my classes is, and this is kind of in the context of the fact that I teach part time, and in full time I've been in leadership roles, and I've had some successes, and I've written a book, and I'm a registered psychologist and social worker. There's all this stuff that kind of makes me look like I'm a somebody, or like sometimes so I end up with students who sort of treat me as if I'm somebody. And anyway, it just doesn't sit well with me.
I hear you.
But so one of the things that I do, though, that I think shocks them is I'll tell them that the truth that in my first year university I failed everything.
Wow.
So they're seeing me as this professor and this kind of accomplished professional in real life and all this stuff, and I failed everything. I got credit for a 1 semester course out of 10 essentially. That's it. And I had to go back and start the next year on probation. And still was a mediocre student for 2 years. In those days we were using number grades, not letters, and my average was 62.3. That's pretty much just squeaking through. And so I'll tell them that, and the point to telling them that is exactly that. I don't know, don't think that sort of success in life involves some kind of perfect person or some kind of person who's on a perfect path. It's again, like, perfection doesn't exist. So, you fall down 7 times, get up 8, kind of.
Absolutely.
And so that's part of the lesson in it, is going back to what we said about Nietzsche. I mean, I don't know, that just kind of makes sense, that I don't know, just don't create that kind of idol in anybody.
Unrealistically.
We're all just people kind of finding our way one day at a time and working hard to either feed our family or achieve something in life, or contribute to a profession, or or make a difference in the world, or whatever. We're still all just doing it one day at a time, figuring it out, and falling down lots.
Right.
And I'm no different than any average undergrad student who really doesn't have the confidence that they could ever, half of them struggle to even believe that they're good enough to be in university. They struggle to believe that. They look around, they think, I'm in here with all these smart people. We call it imposter syndrome, right? And it's just so common. So that's why I like to do that, because they see me sort of as a leader, but I'd like to kind of smash that a little bit. And smash what they think that means. And
just a person. I've tried to make it an effort to really, especially in my personal life, because one of the things that people don't see, so maybe someone found your transcript and could find out, okay, he failed. This is true. He failed. But one of the things I think, especially young people, let's say before under 18, is they have a lot of like self-doubt and a lot of thoughts, that maybe even dark thoughts, maybe even some, to get into the shadow Carl Jung idea, that this darkness that's sort of within you, maybe you have some of those thoughts as well. And if you have someone that you're looking up to, you don't see that. You don't see the doubt they've had along the way. You don't see, the maybe the resentment that they carried for 5 years about something. So it's it's to me it gets down to the ego, because as an individual, you don't want to say, yeah, when me and my girlfriend broke up when I was 15, yeah, I felt like popping her tires in her car. You know what I mean? Like I actually had that. No, I didn't personally. I've thought terrible things too. Not that particular example though, but you know what I mean. These sort of these feelings that you've had and we've contemplated, and then you've overcome them at the end of the day. But if you're looking at someone as an idol and you think that they don't have any internal doubt, or they've never thought anything evil, or they've never, and then you think to yourself, well, I'm thinking these thoughts, so I've got to be bad, right? Like, and that's how the psychology goes. So, my personal relationships where I have people that are looking up to me, I try and make it clear that, listen, like, I bawled my eyes out when me and my first girlfriend broke up. Like, it's okay. Like, I was weak, I was pathetic for a while. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. And look at me now. Still nothing.
And still bawling my eyes out when a girlfriend breaks up with me.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's funny. I get a lot of students and employees who end up in conversations with me about things that relate to this concept, where they're unsure of themselves, and they somehow don't see themselves having much of a path before them, because they don't think they're smart enough, or they don't think they're like everybody else.
Right.
You know what I mean? All these other people. And it's like I said, about sort of looking at all the other students in the class and thinking they're the smart people, but I'm not like them.
Right.
But what they don't know is that most of the people around them
messed up
are sitting there looking at them too, thinking they're the smart ones.
Yeah.
So I have so many of these conversations, and my favorite thing to tell them is that every single day I have doubt about my ability to do what my job is.
Yeah.
Every day. It is a constant thing. And frankly, I don't know. I think about that as being kind of a normal part of finding that balance in leadership. So one of the things that is commonly known in leadership research is that actually narcissism is actually fairly common among leaders.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what is narcissism? Well, really, it's kind of like an exaggerated confidence, in a sense, right? And
right.
It's a bit of anyway, it's kind of like that. And so so it makes sense that there is this connection, and I've certainly had people who have referred to me that way, and because if they're seeing me if they're only seeing the confident version of me in taking on things, then okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
What they don't know is what's behind the eyes.
Right.
That's what they don't know, is the insecurities. And there's nobody on the planet other than Donald Trump who has no insecurities. Right? I mean, even Putin does. He's got little man syndrome, from being bullied as a short little kid, and so anyway, but people don't see the complete person, because in leadership you do have to show confidence.
Yes.
But at the same time, you have to show humility.
Yeah.
And and if you have insecurities, if you really always do wonder, but you're determined, then humility is not a problem.
Yeah.
It comes pretty naturally.
Right.
And I think it is that balance that earns a leader respect.
Yes.
It is that balance of showing the confidence and the will to overcome anything, and to help the team overcome anything and achieve any goal. You've got to go in with that, but still with the humility that kind of shows, I don't think that if we achieve this, I don't think it's going to be because I did anything great.
Yeah.
It's going to be because we do.
Yeah. Because
we're going to offset each other's imperfections.
Right. Exactly.
Quite frankly. And that's a hard balance to find, though. And it's hard to get young people to see that,
Yeah.
that balance. And
The
so,
reality.
yeah. So whenever someone talks about things like imposter syndrome to me, the young folks, I always tell them I have it. I've always had it my whole life, and yet, I've had a pretty decent career and achieved some stuff.
Yeah.
And so you just keep going and you recognize that that's a normal kind of thing.
I get it most mornings.
Do you?
I don't know why, but my sort of overly critical side of me comes up when I'm waking up in the morning. So it's very common that I'll wake up in the morning and just feel like a complete imposter. At my job, like doing the podcast, if I'm dating someone, friends, like everything, it's just sort of, it's this like huge revelation. And I actually see it as a good thing because it keeps my ego in check.
Yeah.
I had a friend, a close friend, tell me a few weeks ago that he said I come off pretty humble, and I tell him, like, listen, man, I feel like I'm constantly on a tightrope between my ego blowing up where it's out of control and falling down and having no self-confidence. Like, I feel like I'm always just on that balancing rope, and like every now and then one of those sides comes out.
Yeah.
But it's always like it's a constant thing to try and maintain that balance between those two extremes. And unfortunately, it's a big slide. Like, you don't have to get too much overconfidence before all of a sudden your ego is massive.
Yeah.
And you also don't have to have, you get a little bit, you fail a couple times and then you lose a bit of confidence. It doesn't take long before your self-esteem is just gone.
Yeah. Or you're in a depression.
Exactly.
That's the extreme end of that slide, right?
Yes.
And so,
absolutely.
yeah, those slides take you to ultimately to true narcissism and complete depression.
Yeah.
As thinking of yourself as a nobody, a nothing.
And I think, I guess maybe one of the last big takeaways is basically what you said there, is that you have to recognize that leaders, no matter what they're giving off, and even if they're aware of it or not, they're definitely not perfect. They're definitely trying to, or they're somewhere on that spectrum between, having no self-confidence and maybe being a bit narcissistic and having too big of an ego. And as a leader, you have to find a way to make that known while also making sure the team has confidence in your competence. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that is the balancing act. That is the tightrope. And I think it's a crucial piece of it. I don't think, people will not follow a leader who doesn't display confidence.
Yeah.
So if you're heading into a jungle and I'm going to stand in front of you and be the first one walking through there, if I'm kind of leading into the unknown, which technically, in my view, is the definition of leadership.
Yeah.
It's going into the unknown. If everything's known, then you're not leading. Everybody's just
Yeah.
going where they already know.
Machines.
Right.
Yeah.
But, if we're heading in there and I'm saying, oh, geez, I have no idea what's in there, and I'm not sure that we can handle it, we might get killed. Well, I think they'll figure out a different direction to go.
Yeah, you'll turn around and they'll be gone.
Right. But if I'm saying we've got this,
yeah.
Like, if they're sensing that we've got this, because I know that we can, one step at a time, we can figure out our way through this. It's contagious. Confidence is contagious if somebody in a leadership role, just gives off that air of confidence. It's not just the words. You need to actually show it. And confidence and humility are sometimes like polar opposites.
Yeah.
So people tend to want to follow leaders who are humble, but people tend to want to follow leaders who are confident.
Yeah.
So you need to be doing what you just described. You need to be in the middle. People need to see both. Yeah. They need to get snapshots kind of both. And that's why, I don't know, my self-deprecating humor is kind of, well, that kind of shows that one side of me. And if you listen to, if you know anything about, Brené Brown, and, she's really done so much about this concept of vulnerability being such an important thing. And I think that's part of that humility side of things. And so just being like that with the people that are following you makes sense. But then when you're hitting a challenge, they need to see that you're a rock.
Yeah.
And whether you feel like a rock inside or not, it's a whole other issue.
Right.
but they need to feel like you are. And, I often say that leadership is more than a skill set. It's actually a way of being. And so that's where we get at all this stuff. It's about being the kind of person that people want to follow, and, because they know that if they do, we will collectively achieve something.
Yeah.
And that requires that they look at somebody that they can trust is confident and that inspires them that way, but who's humble enough to be one of them.
Yeah. I think the imagery that came to mind when you were describing that is actually a strength athlete that's picking up a bar off the squat rack and they come back. Now, when an athlete lifts a really heavy weight that's at their max, or you're talking about the situation where like this is a challenging place to be in, they actually tend to be a little bit jittery, a little bit unstable. Now they're still stable enough to do the lift, but you'll see them, they're very clenched and they're shaking a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people need to see. Now there's this focus that's allowing them to do that. So they are still able to succeed despite that extreme pressure. But I suppose the underlying point is that, you can be a little unsteady and still really be successful in situations. And really that's what you're talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely. You combine that with some of the other stuff we've talked about in terms of being, creating sort of a culture of safety for people who are not in the leadership roles.
Yeah.
So that, because they're all people who are having these insecurities we've been talking about, and imposter syndrome and all that stuff. So So how do you make them feel completely supported and safe? Like basically you've got them under your wing. One of the ways to do that kind of thing is to keep them from shaking too hard when you do hit some of those tough spots,
right,
is actually one of the other pieces that we know that effective leaders tend to have, and that is pretty strong skills in empathy.
Yes.
Right, because if you're wanting people to follow you, wanting people to be able to master some of their own fears, and you need to be able to kind of really hear their experience.
Yeah.
And that's what empathy really is.
Yeah.
It's about can you see the world and this workplace through that person's eyes, not through yours.
Yeah.
And you combine those things, you got somebody who's actually able to lead and who people will want to join and follow intentionally.
Yeah.
I know of people who have moved from one organization to another and who have ended up with dozens of people leaving the previous organization to follow that leader.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's the sign. Like that kind of thing is the test, right?
Yeah.
Are there people who really, it matters who they report to. It matters who their leader is. And I have avoided seeking particular jobs in the past just because of who I know I would be reporting to.
Yep, me as well.
It's just like, sorry, not a chance. The job might be the most perfect fit in the world, but sorry, I just can't. I will not follow that person because of ethical kinds of issues, or just, I think incompetence as a leader, or not having all of the stuff we're talking about here.
Right.
And I mean, it's, anybody who thinks their job is, to be the boss, well, sorry, I don't want to work for them.
Yeah.
If their job is to be the leader, absolutely, and I'll do what I'm told. But I need to be able to challenge you. I need to be able to have the flip side of everything we've talked about today.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things, I think, are the real tests of leaders. What do you see happen when they move along? And are there people who are attracted to applying to work for them, or volunteer for them, or whatever?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great spot to end. I think we're at an hour 20. That's not too bad here. Hey, thanks again for talking with me. Listen, it's always a pleasure, always fun, always cover some interesting ground, I think, between us. Sure, it won't be the last time. Any final words for the people at home, driving, or at work listening?
Well, yeah, actually, I would say I think our world is full of many people who are aspiring leaders. I think that many people want to be leaders, and in whatever their work is, or in social change. Because leadership isn't about a position in an organization. Leadership is about a way of being, and it's
Yeah.
about leading people towards something. And so that might be as a manager or a CEO in a company or an organization, but it might be as an advocate for social change on something. You might be a climate change, driver. You might want better mental health services. You might want all kinds of stuff. You might want to systemic racism to be reduced
Yeah.
in policing. So leadership it isn't within any particular context. It's actually about who you are and how you are in whatever it is you are doing that you want other people to do.
Yeah.
So don't back away from it. If anybody's thinking about, if you kind of see yourself as wanting to be a leader, just start. Just start. Whatever it is, just start. Whether you're in a frontline position in an organization or you're just a single person who wants to change the world, doesn't matter. Just start being like a leader.
Yeah.
All the stuff we've talked about today. Try to analyze yourself. What are the areas that you think you've already got wrapped up? And probably for most people, it's the insecurity and humility piece.
Right.
But what are the pieces that you need to work on?
Yeah.
So start working on those and start to just be the person that you think you would want to follow.
Yeah.
And it'll just happen. For many people, it'll just happen. And if you want actual experience, volunteer for some things. Join a committee or a board in your community, or a local school or a nonprofit. And when somebody says, okay, well, who's interested in being the secretary for the board or in being the president next year, put up your hand.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's all it takes to get the role, and then you get a chance to try your skills and build them.
Right.
It doesn't take that much other than just wanting to and then understanding how to be.
Yeah.
So
Bear that cross.
yeah, just don't back away from it. Just start.
Love it. Thank you so much again.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Cheers. Until next time. Bye, everyone.